Committees in public session. 4 members are here. Right? Apologies have been received from our chairman, Deputy Fergus O'Dowd, and Deputy Senator Frank Feehan. And before we begin, can I remind members to turn off their mobile phones completely as interfere with the recording equipment. I am now proposing that we go into private session to deal with some housekeeping matters. Is that agreed? We're now in public session, okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The meeting is now resumed and is in public session. Before we begin, can I remind members to turn off their mobile phones completely as interfere with the recording equipment. Agreed. Now, we now turn to our engagement with the Chairman Designate of the Irish Aviation Authority, Mr. Michael McGrail. Mr. McGrail, you're more than welcome here this morning. And the purpose of our meeting today is to hear from yourself, your approach to undertaking in your role as Chairman and your vision for the company. Before we commence, and for the purpose of witnesses attending, in accordance with procedure, I am required to read the following. By virtue of Section 17(2)(1 of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect to the evidence you are to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter, and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to that effect. Where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the House or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I now invite Mr. McGrail, Chairperson of IAA, to make his opening presentation. Dr. McGrail.
Members of the committee, good morning. I'm delighted to have been appointed Chair Designate of the Irish Aviation Authority just 3 weeks ago by the Minister of Transport, Tourism and Sport, Mr. Shane Ross TD. And thank you for the invitation to present an overview of my professional background, to set out the challenges facing the Irish Aviation Authority as I see them, and how I hope to support the Chief Executive, the management and staff of IAA over the next few years. I look forward to answering your questions after my short presentation. I've attached a brief CV in your documentation. I was born in Belfast, but I've lived most of my life in Dublin. Following school, I obtained a commerce degree from UCD. I then joined Coopers & Lybrand, now PwC, and qualified as a chartered accountant. In 1986, I was appointed a partner in the Irish firm with responsibility for establishing a corporate finance service. I then subsequently became a partner in charge of the firm's management consultancy service. And in 1998, on the merger of Coopers & Lybrand and Price Waterhouse to form PwC, I was appointed to lead the firm's combined consultancy services. In these roles, I acted for many clients in the transport, telecommunications, financial services, food industries, including public and private corporate, state enterprises, government departments and bodies. In 2006, I retired as a partner in PwC, and in 2010, I joined the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland as Director of Corporate Strategy. My responsibilities in RCSI include banking relationships here and in overseas locations, major infrastructural projects, investments, assessments of new education markets, and the commercial aspects of overseas operations. I have a passionate and continuing interest in aviation, which I believe can be a key enabler for social and economic betterment. This is particularly true for Ireland, as an island with an open economy on the periphery of Europe, where connectivity is crucial. It is this interest and belief that led me to apply for this position. I would like to spend, at your invitation, a little time outlining Ireland's role in the global aviation industry, in particular its significance to the Irish economy and the role of the Irish Aviation Authority within this industry, and where I see its current challenges. As an island, we are far more dependent on aviation than many of our continental neighbours and trading partners. A recent report commissioned by Dublin Airport Authority indicates that the sector contributes 8.3 billion to our GDP, including aviation supply industries. The sector supports almost 30,000 jobs directly and a further 16,000 in the aviation supply chain, before we consider those retail jobs at airports and the related retail supply chains. Jobs in the aviation sector tend to be highly skilled jobs: engineers, pilots, air traffic controllers, and in the financial services industry. But more than this, aviation is an enabling industry. Tourism is heavily dependent upon aviation, while reliable and efficient connectivity to the UK, Europe, North America, and indeed Asia is now an imperative for Irish business in the global economy. Aviation is therefore one of the vital cogs in the Irish economy, as I mentioned. This is one of the key reasons I was interested in this position. Within this global industry, Ireland's role is significant. 14 of the world's 15 largest aircraft leasing companies are located in Ireland, with approximately 50% of the world's leased fleet being managed from Ireland, equivalent to 4,300 aircraft, equating to a value of approximately $125 billion. An Irish-managed aircraft departs every 2 seconds around the globe. Europe's largest airline, Ryanair, with 446 aircraft, is based in Ireland, while Aer Lingus is growing as a transatlantic and European airline, as are Norwegian, CityJet and Stobart Air. All of our airports are important. Dublin Airport is now becoming an internationally significant hub. It handled 30 million passengers for the first time in 2017 and 216,000 commercial flight movements. Cork, Shannon and Knock international airports are also increasing passenger numbers, albeit at a slower rate. Ireland has a strategic prominence in the North Atlantic in terms of air traffic management. 90% of all air traffic to and from the US travels through our airspace, the busiest oceanic airspace in the world. Ireland's significance in the aviation sector has been achieved through a combination of the appropriate regulatory and financial environment, government policy which supports aviation, a highly skilled workforce, visionary thinking and strong aviation leadership. The challenge is to maintain this position while ensuring we continue to grow the industry and grow jobs, while never compromising on our standards of excellence. Turning to the Irish Aviation Authority, it fills a key role across all of the sectors just mentioned. The IAA is responsible for the management of Irish-controlled airspace, the safety regulation of Irish civil aviation, and the oversight of civil aviation security in Ireland. The IAA's remit is always to act in the interests of public safety. The IAA manages Irish-controlled airspace covering some 451,000 square kilometres. The IAA's air traffic management role includes the provision of operational services, engineering and communications in this airspace, and the provision of the related air traffic technological infrastructure. The IAA is among the most efficient service providers in Europe, and despite the challenges of a significant growth in air traffic levels in the past 3 to 4 years, the IAA continues to offer a competitively priced, high-quality service to its airline customers. The IAA had a record-breaking year in 2017, handling upwards of 1.13 million flights. This includes flights taking off or landing at Irish airports, aircraft overflying Ireland, and our North Atlantic communication service for transatlantic flights. This is an additional and important service that IAA provide to aircraft in the region of North Atlantic called Shanwick, west of Irish airspace. We are also responsible for the safety regulation of the civil aviation industry in Ireland. Safety is at the very heart of IAA's operations. It is in essence our corporate mission and underpins everything that we do. The board and executive management foster a culture throughout the organisation where safety is paramount. At the end of August 2018, there were 1,422 aircraft on the Irish register, of which 957 were considered large aircraft, and they are overseen by the IAA's inspectors. These aircraft are located around the world, from Ireland to Italy, from Mexico to Mongolia, and indeed Russia. We license 11,500 flight crew, 1,700 aircraft maintenance engineers, as well as air traffic controllers, training organisations, maintenance and parts companies. Through its 689 staff across 6 locations, the authority ensures that Irish civil aviation operates to international and European safety standards and systems in accordance with international agreements and protocols. In 2017, Ireland was ranked among the best in the world for overall civil aviation safety oversight in the annual ICAO and EASA ranking process. Ireland ranked 2nd in Europe and 5th in the world, ahead of countries such as the UK, USA, Germany and the Netherlands. Indeed, our air traffic management safety was ranked joint first among European states in 2017 in the annual CANSO benchmarking process. But safety is an ongoing process requiring continual monitoring and improvement. Continuing to improve safety standards and performance will be a key priority for mine as chair. The IAA is also responsible for security oversight. We audit and inspect civil aviation installations in terms of their compliance with national and international security requirements. This is also a high priority area. The IAA works closely with the government, national security agencies and the airports to ensure the appropriate level of security is in place to protect passengers and cargo freight. Although owned by the state, the IAA receives no funding directly from the state aside from its initial share capital. Our revenues are generated through charges and fees raised from our regulatory clients and airline customers in respect of their regulatory and operating activities. The IAA is a profitable company. In 2017, the IAA generated an operating profit of $33.5 million on a turnover of $193.4 million and paid a dividend to the state of $19.5 million from after-tax profits. The IAA has no debt, and assuming continued profitability, the IAA has adequate cash to service its planned expenditure on our critical technological needs over the next 5 years. However, there are financial challenges, in particular with charging structures, which will require close monitoring. I'll now briefly discuss some of those challenges. But firstly, I'd like to highlight some of the wider challenges which the aviation sector in Ireland faces. Aviation is a highly competitive and very mobile industry and must continually adapt and innovate in order to stay competitive. Dublin Airport in particular is competing with other international hubs, including London Heathrow, Amsterdam, Paris and Manchester. Yet Dublin Airport is already operating at near capacity. The timely development and optimal operation of the new parallel north runway is a crucial element to allow Dublin to be competitive and maintain growth in the sector. Our leasing industry also faces competitive threats from emerging leasing hubs such as Amsterdam and Hong Kong. We must continue to offer an attractive location for aircraft leasing by ensuring that government policy continues to support this sector of our economy as an attractive location for the type of skilled employees needed. Turning to IAA's specific challenges, the first of these is the government's reform of aviation regulation in Ireland. This project will see the commercial air traffic management functions of the IAA separated from the safety and regulatory functions, with the expansion of the existing aviation regulatory body. The separation process will present challenges for the IAA and our staff, but we are committed to delivering the project and are actively working with the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport and the Commission for Aviation Regulation. Our focus is to ensure a smooth separation in accordance with government policy. Moving to Brexit, and given the apparent impasse between the UK and the EU, a satisfactory withdrawal agreement, transition period and then future relationship is in doubt. Apart from the disruption for aviation and the travelling public, a hard Brexit would have a significant negative impact on our wider economy. Again, the Department is carrying out scenario planning to ensure the minimisation of any negative consequences, and the IAA is working in close collaboration with the Department and other agencies in this regard. Innovation and technology play a key role in safe and efficient air traffic management. We're currently developing a new visual control tower and associated infrastructure at Dublin Airport. This €55 million investment will be a state-of-the-art ATM facility necessary to operate Dublin Airport when the new north runway is built. Dublin Airport reached capacity levels this summer. There is an urgent need for the new north runway to be built in order to allow for traffic levels to grow with passenger demand. The IAA has been successful in keeping delays at Dublin to a minimum, but I cannot overstate the importance and necessity of the new infrastructure. The IAA staff expertly manages up to 50 flight movements per hour on the single runway at Dublin Airport, almost one per minute at peak times. During the month of August alone, the IAA safely managed 21,452 arrivals and departures at Dublin Airport, an average of 692 per day. Aside from Dublin, our en route centre at Ballycasey, Cross and Shannon has already managed 233,000 flights to the end of August, with our North Atlantic Communications Centre managing 340,000 flights so far this year. So we believe we are on course for a record year, exceeding the 1.13 million flights managed by IAA in 2017. Up to 85% of the IAA's revenue is subject to strict economic regulation under the requirements of the Single European Sky Performance and Charging Scheme. Our revenues and costs are subject to detailed review by a variety of parties, including the National Supervisory Authority, the airlines, the European Commission's performance review body, and indeed the European Commission itself. We're currently nearing the end of a 5-year regulatory control period for the years 2015 to 2019, referred to as Reference Period 2, while preparations for the next 5-year period, Reference Period 3, 2020 to 2024, are intensifying. The IAA has been one of the best performers across Europe in recent years, meeting and exceeding our targets in the key performance areas of safety, environment, capacity and cost. What this means in practical terms is that aircraft flying in Irish airspace receive a high-quality service with no delays and at one of the lowest prices in Europe. But we are concerned at the broad thrust of the EC's planning for the next regulatory phase, RP3. The focus of the EC and its supporting bodies is for lower costs. While this may be appropriate for some of the higher cost regions in Europe, this one-size-fits-all approach would be damaging for Ireland. If the EC pushes a cost reduction policy onto the IAA over the next 5 years, the quality of service and efficiency that the IAA offers its customers will suffer. The IAA's costs are among the lowest in Europe. It will not be possible to go any lower. Indeed, given the significant increase in air traffic in recent years and the need to continually reinvest in technology and high-quality people, a cost increase for the IAA would, in our view, be required. Safety will always be our number one priority, but an appropriate cost allowance is needed to ensure that we can continue to be flexible, dynamic and efficient in the way that we manage Irish airspace for the benefit of our airline customers. So we're calling on the government to support us in this area and to ensure that European policy does not punish those who are already best in class. The IAA plays a key role in the management of air traffic in the strategically significant area of the North Atlantic airspace known as Shanwick, west of Irish and UK airspace. 90% of transatlantic flights fly through this area and are managed jointly by the UK and Ireland under an agreement that dates back to 1996. The IAA is responsible for the high-frequency communication to the aircraft, while the UK carries out the air traffic management service. It is important that Ireland maintains its position of influence on the North Atlantic in the years to come. With changes in technology, the IAA needs to adapt and ensure the services we offer remain in demand. High frequency is in decline, and it is important that the IAA replace that service in the years to come with additional services to customers in the North Atlantic. In addition, there's a need to review and revise the 1996 agreement to ensure that the principle of joint service provision between the UK and Ireland remains intact. The IAA has always stood for innovation and excellence, and this will not change under my stewardship. I've already mentioned the new air traffic control tower at Dublin Airport, a visual example of the IAA's ambitions for the future. In addition, the IAA is at the cutting edge of remote tower technology, and we're developing a state-of-the-art facility for the operation of Shannon Airport remotely in the coming years. We continue to work with our partners in Aviation, our satellite-based surveillance company. Recently, the Aviation Alert Service commenced the registration of aircraft. This new service allows for the global tracking of aircraft registered with the service, something which has not been possible to date. The global service will be based in our centre in Ballygurran in County Clare. I must address the report on aviation search and rescue oversight, the AQE report, which the Minister of Transport, Tourism and Sport published last week. There are a number of recommendations in the report for the IAA to implement. We welcome all of the recommendations and look forward to working with the Department and other stakeholders to deliver improvements to the regulatory oversight of search and rescue in the state. Continuous improvement is a core philosophy in aviation safety management, and the IAA is committed to playing its part to deliver a robust oversight for search and rescue. The Minister has made it clear that he wishes all of the recommendations contained in the report implemented as soon as possible, and that is now also a priority for the IAA. Finally, an important priority for myself would be corporate governance, including ensuring the proper functioning of the board. As the board evolves through reappointments and new members, it will be crucial to have the right balance of skills, views and diversity to support the Chief Executive, management and staff. We will work with the Department and the Public Appointment Service to deliver the appropriate balance. As Chair of the IEA, my role is to lead and support the Board and the Executive in their efforts to properly deal with all of the challenges ahead and in their aspirations to achieve and exceed the organisation's goals. It's my strongly held view that Ireland should continue to support and encourage the aviation sector, that we should exceed normal expectations and position Ireland as a true centre of excellence for aviation. Through this approach, the aviation industry will be able to provide more high-quality jobs, more taxes and wealth in the economy, and to maintain and grow Ireland's positive reputation in the aviation sector. The IEA will remain a central element of our success. The IEA is committed to continuing to drive high standards across the sector, working always in the interests of public safety. As Chair of the IEA, I will be prioritising this effort, and I'm looking forward to making, hopefully, a contribution to the aviation success story in Ireland. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. McGrail. Okay, as you know, we will now turn over the floor, and I will call on the first speaker and questions in Senator John O'Mahony.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. And first of all, thank you, Mr. McGrail, for your presentation, thorough presentation, and you seem eminently qualified for the tasks that you have been asked to take up. But I just maybe, and I do realise that you haven't got your feet under the table yet as such, but just a few topics that I'd like you maybe to expand on a little bit. You mentioned there, which we all see, the phenomenal growth of Dublin Airport, you know, with the record numbers last year of 30 million. I've seen it, and obviously connectivity and the importance of tourism for Ireland and all of this is hugely important, and those figures have been very good as well. But there's a suggestion that, I suppose, following that Dublin Airport now is becoming more of a hub, and that's what was projected and expected. But is there a danger that it become, you know, in other words, that or is there any analysis done, or would there need to be an analysis done on the amount of people passing through Dublin Airport, if you like, that aren't actually coming into the country but are going through the Dublin Airport hub, and is that responsible for the huge growth in numbers, more than maybe the domestic economy? Just you might expand on that a little bit. Obviously, the other thing that you mentioned in your presentation is the Brexit, the implications of Brexit. I suppose for people in general, there are huge concerns, as we all know, on that at the moment. But for the aviation, you mentioned about the negative disruption for aviation and the travelling public that a hard Brexit would bring. What are the practical implications in the short term for if there isn't a deal here? I mean, is this going to come to an abrupt end, if you like, for flying between here and the open skies policy and all of that? So you might just maybe expand on that a little bit as well. You mentioned as well about the IAA separation, the reform of the aviation regulation in Ireland, the separation of commercial air traffic management, separated from the safety regulatory functions, and you mentioned the challenges that will bring to the. You might just expand on that a little bit. And finally, you mentioned the search and rescue report last week that the Minister published, and on a brief reading of that, obviously it's suggesting, isn't it, that the Irish Aviation Authority would take control of the safety decisions and all of that for the search and rescue area. In other words, that up to now, I understand, is that the Department of Transport, the Coast Guard and other statutory bodies are involved. Could you maybe just expand on that? Obviously, Because of this report, and I note that the Minister wants it implemented in full, what challenges does that, or have the IAA the resources to take on that function as well, or you might just expand on that a little bit as well? Thank you. That's my question.
Mr. Ray.
Thank you, Senator. Well, if I try and take those in order, in terms of Dublin Airport, I suppose the IAA is relatively passive in terms of the passenger numbers that go through Dublin Airport. That's really a priority for and a responsibility of Dublin Airport Authority. Now, having said that, I think particularly since the acquisition by IAG of Aer Lingus, I think passenger numbers have been increasing. Numbers passing through the airport in transit have been increasing. I don't have the exact numbers, but I would think they're possibly less than 10% of the 30-odd million passengers that would be going through the airport. But that's certainly something I can get for you and I can provide to the committee.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
In terms of Brexit, yes, I mean it's. If there is a hard Brexit as such, well then the UK becomes a third country, and therefore both the air traffic management and the air safety regulations that currently govern not only the UK but ourselves and the rest of Europe would fall away. I think that there obviously would be practical, immediate practical issues, really, I suppose, from midnight on the 29th of March. Having said that, we know that the Department are working on practical solutions to that, and they have a number of scenarios that they're looking at, and we are working closely with them to try and see how those scenarios would actually work. But obviously, neither the IAA nor the Irish government are, can control this. It's very much an EU and
so there is a danger, practical danger, that on the 29th of March that the flights to the UK would halt. Is that it?
Well, there would be. I mean, and I think you would have read the publications from the UK government on Monday, which indicated that was the case. That would be the factual position. But I would think that there's a lot to be done between now and then, and I don't think it would be in anybody's interest for that to actually happen.
No, that's fine. I just basically, I suppose, I'm thinking here as a member of the public as well.
Sure.
That's obviously there's a lot happening behind the scenes, yes. But that's a worst case scenario. But I just.
Well, I mean, I suppose if you look at it kind of in a simple way, there's a general passporting of both traffic and safety within all of Europe. If somebody leaves that, therefore they leave that passporting approval process.
Okay.
In terms of the IAA separation, when we say that there will be a challenge for the IAA, that's really the simple process of actually separation. There will be a need to establish a new co, which will take the air traffic management business. There will be a need to ensure that obviously the terms and conditions of all of staff will be, which I know would be the government's wish, will be retained. So the policy is clear. It's simply the challenge of actually getting it done, and getting it done in a way to ensure that the separation runs smoothly. It's not a. I think everybody is quite clear what has to be done. It's a question of just getting it done.
Okay. Okay.
In terms of the AQE report and on behalf of the IAA, certainly we would obviously wish to have recorded our condolences to the four families of who lost their loved ones. The AQE report was very much looking at the current situation and looking forward, and it did highlight that there was some confusion, I think may have been the word that was reported in the media. That may be slightly strong, but there was uncertainty about exactly the roles among a variety of different agencies. and they were suggesting that the IAA would obviously take over overall oversight of SAR. The IAA is working with the department and very happy to do that. The point you mentioned, there will be a need for additional resources in the IAA in order to ensure that they can carry out that role.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Deputy Robert Troy.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and welcome to Mr McGrail before the committee here this morning. Just a number of questions. You seem to have more than adequate experience in terms of financial and corporate governance for the role in hand, and you say you're passionate and have continued interest in the aviation sector. Can I ask, have you any relevant experience in aviation itself? And I suppose part of that, you're going to be chair of a board. Can I ask how many vacancies currently are on your board, and do you feel that there is the relevant expertise across the board in terms of corporate governance, in terms of financial expertise, accountancy, but also very relevant for this board is health and safety expertise in aviation, and do you feel coming in as chair of the board that all the necessary expertise are being met? One of the questions was in relation to the separation of the IVA, and you've already replied to my colleague in terms of the challenges that you see that this poses. This will require necessary legislation. Is there any indication in terms of your correspondence or your engagement with the department at what stage this legislation is at, or when can we expect to have that legislation come before the Oireachtas? The visual contract tower needed for the second runway at Dublin Airport, construction, I understand, has commenced on that. When do you envisage this being complete? And we know that we're still awaiting the legislation in relation to the appointment of the independent competent noise regulator, and you say that Dublin Airport is at capacity. So how do you feel that we're going to be able to meet the demand and facilitate the demand of Dublin Airport over the next 3 years plus? Because the length of time it's going to take to get the legislation through, the length of time it's going to take to get the DAA to appeal the conditions in relation to noise, you're really looking at a 2 to 3 year window there. And how do you feel that the IAA, working with the DAA, will be able to ensure that we can manage the increase in passengers that are expected and quite likely over the coming number of years? You speak about the review that's ongoing currently in relation to the RP3 revenue generation, and how you already said that there's no room for improvement because you're the best in the class, and I suppose it's always welcome to be the best in the class, and you're calling on the government to support the IAA in relation to ensuring that European policy. Will that be down to Minister Ross and the Department of Transport to engage with his counterparts at the Council of European Ministers for Transport? And in that vein, given the fact that he's certainly not best in the class for attendance at those meetings, and certainly not best in the class for engagement with his counterparts, have you confidence that the government will be able to support the IAA in relation to pursuing your objectives? Search and rescue, I think you alluded to it with the previous speaker. You're right, the report did indicate a very clear lack of clarity in terms of who has the designated responsibility in relation to search and rescue. And I'm conscious that the report we're talking about wasn't in relation to the awful tragedy and the loss of lives, and we remember the families who were bereaved with that awful loss of life this morning. But we need to ensure that going forward there is clear demarcation But my understanding from the reading of the report is it's the responsibility of the Department of Transport to ensure that the necessary legislation is put in place to remove any ambiguity, to remove any uncertainty. So when the Minister talks about making sure that the recommendations contained within the report are implemented as soon as possible, and I'm glad that's a priority for the IAA, it's also a priority for the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport, and they need to be forthcoming in relation to when to publish the necessary legislation, and again have to give any indication in terms of when that legislation will be published for this committee to scrutinise and implement. I suppose Brexit is the key in terms of aviation, and we know that we're all quite well aware that we're currently working under the Open Skies policy, which has enabled the huge growth in the aviation sector, which has contributed to economic growth and has contributed to the growth of our tourism sector over the last number of years. And it is quite worrying when you referred to it yourself, the British papers this week, and the challenges that we now face in relation to the UK coming out of the Open Skies. Can I ask, in terms of, and I understand that Project 50 earlier this year had referred to the ICAO freedoms, and I think it's specifically the third and fourth freedom, which would enable freedom of movement and ensure connectivity between the UK and the EU 27. To your knowledge, how near are we to ensure that those freedoms will be implemented to ensure that we do retain connectivity post-Brexit? And finally, an issue that I wasn't overly aware of, but in terms of safety standards, and a large proportion of critical piece of aircraft is actually sourced from the UK, and key components to keep planes in the sky that would be able to be used up until the 29th of March. If there's no agreement in terms of safety recognition, in terms of quality, well then those key components will no longer be able to be used. And are you aware that there's intensive negotiations ongoing to ensure that the safety quality control recognition will be able to be dealt with post or pre-Brexit?
Okay, that's great.
Thank you. Well, maybe if I try again and answer all of those questions in turn. In terms of my own experience as a partner in PricewaterhouseCoopers, I would have had as a client Aer Lingus and a variety of other airlines within Europe. I also would have been involved in the establishment, for example, of what was Shannon Aerospace in Shannon. I would have done a lot of work in the air maintenance sector, but in particular in the airline sector as well. I would believe that I have I have the expertise to be able to assess certainly what's happening in the aviation sector. But having said that, it is a very specialised sector, and I would obviously be using the expertise of the IAA and indeed the department to ensure that I understand what the actual issues are. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I do have experience in that sector. I'm happy to provide details of the work that I've done in the aviation sector to the committee if that would be a help. In terms of the board, yes, the board, the member articles of the board have require nine board members. At the moment, there are 4. Plus myself as a designate, subject to yourselves, I would be the 5th board member. So we are short 4 board members.
Can I ask how long are those positions vacant? You may
I-
not be aware.
I wouldn't be fully aware. I would say probably during this year. I know there was, I would say probably during this year, during 2018. And I know that there is a process ongoing with the public appointment service, and I think there is a call out at the moment, which I think the closing date could be this week. I'm not certain, but I think it could be this week for applications for the board. Obviously, it's the role of the Department of Transport, as in other state boards, to actually appoint these people. But again, the department, I know, will be working with myself in terms of trying to look at the applications. In terms of your question, do we have sufficient competencies? I think when you've only got 5 out of 9, I think that there's a certain limit, and I think we would be hoping, as I said in my statement, that we would have additional competencies, particularly in terms of safety. I think that would be really important. So I think that process is ongoing, and I'm assured, and was assured by the Minister indeed on Monday, that that process will be hopefully dealt with within the coming months. In terms of the separation, I'm afraid I can't tell you exactly when the department hope to introduce legislation. Again, in my discussions with them, they do see it as something to be moved on quite quickly. But I don't have any date for but I'd have to say I haven't asked them for a date as to when the legislation would be brought forward. In terms of the tower in Dublin, the tower will be, the construction of the tower and the tower will be handed over to the IAA in 2020. It will then take approximately 2 years to actually make sure it's totally functional. The existing tower will remain and will be a backup tower, but during that process there will be dual operation between the 2 towers to ensure that the new tower is operational. The larger question as to what happens over the next three years or so, as I understand it, the new runway contracts will be, and again this is a DAA project, it's not an IAA project, but I understand that contracts for the new runway will be issued imminently, or certainly requests for tenders will be issued imminently, and that the actual runway will be operational within about 3 years or so. Obviously there are restrictions on the runway which you alluded to, but the actual presence of an additional runway will obviously increase the capacity, even despite those restrictions. It will increase the capacity for takeoff and landings within Dublin Airport. In terms of RP3, I don't know if any of you have seen the 2017 annual report of the Irish Aviation Authority, but there's a graph in there which shows the IAA's charges by reference to other countries. And what's interesting is that our charges are quite keen, but our charges are lower than what I would call adjoining countries with similar labour environments, such as the UK, France, Germany, etc. So our issue is that we can understand why the European Commission obviously want to control costs, but we would feel that we're doing well, and I believe the department also feel that. In terms of the negotiations that will happen in the European Commission, the IAA will be a part of that, but they also have a strong relationship with the department and indeed join with the department in a lot of those discussions as well. So certainly from my discussions with the department, I would believe that we will get the support we need to try and certainly put forward a very strong case for Ireland that we are doing well, but we can't, we need to be able to invest in all of our technology over a period of time, and therefore that means that it will be difficult for us to sustain a reduction in our charges. In terms of the search and rescue and the AQE report, yes, and again, when I met with the department on Monday, we spoke a lot about that. Again, I didn't ask them, maybe I should have, I didn't ask them the direct question as to when will legislation be introduced, but I know it is a priority for them. Prior to the legislation, obviously the IAA will be working with the department to ensure that we begin to get the resources needed to actually to ensure we can fulfil the change mandate for the IAA. In terms of Brexit, and you're quite right, that there are two aspects. There's the traffic management aspect within Europe, and when they become a third country, they obviously leave that issue, and then there's the air safety issue. And again, I can only say that certainly the department and the IAA are particularly aware of the importance of the UK, particularly because not only of Airbus but also Rolls-Royce and Boeing have substantial facilities there, which are at the moment passported into Europe in terms of those parts coming into aircraft. And again, we are all very much aware of that, and it will be forming part of the discussion that we have with the department in terms of hopefully avoiding a hard Brexit. Which I think that may have been, that was the last issue I think you raised.
That was the last issue. Just getting back very briefly, the point that I was making is the need to have the relevant expertise across the board of the IAA, and I think we need to hammer home to the department and the relevant minister that, as I said, you're amply qualified in terms of financial, corporate governance, but from a safety, aviation, we need to have the right mix on the board. It's regrettable that the board has been allowed to go down to such a low level, and I think a priority needs to be put in place now to ensure that it meets its full complement and full complement from a competency as well.
Thank you, Deputy. And I suppose I look at it as being an opportunity that we actually have 4 spaces, and that our task working with the department is to ensure that we get that expertise, which I fully accept.
When did you come onto the board yourself, Mr. McGuire? When did you come?
I was appointed on the 4th of September.
Oh, but you didn't serve on the board before that, no?
Sorry?
You didn't serve on the board before that?
No.
Okay, Deputy Munster.
Okay, thanks for your presentation, Mr. McGuire. I noted too that you had said in your presentation that you had a passionate interest in aviation. I was going to ask the question, what actual experience, if any, did you have in it? I know Deputy Troy has asked that, but maybe, as you said, because there was you didn't outline it in your presentation or CV, so maybe, as you suggested yourself, you could furnish the committee just with what experience you've had in the aviation industry. You also mentioned that Ireland is ranked among the best in the world for overall civil aviation oversight. And you had said that there in your presentation. So what I wanted to ask you was, has the IAA, or anyone else for that matter, conducted reports into safety concerns that have been raised by Ryanair pilots? I know Ryanair pilots attempted to raise those concerns at the committee, but they were blocked. So I'm wondering just if you could outline what investigation or what steps you have taken to look into this serious issue. You had mentioned about the separation of the IAA. How will it work exactly? You didn't give specifics on exactly how that will work, and is there a timeline for that too? Also on the search and rescue oversight, is it perhaps you said it and I just didn't pick up on it. Is it confirmed now that you are to take over search and rescue oversight. Is that what the meeting with the department was about? Can you give details of what was discussed at that meeting? And you also mentioned that additional resources will be needed. Was there a commitment given that if the IA were to take over the search and rescue oversight, that funding would be given? I would just like to hear more detail on that, please.
Thank you, Deputy. Yes, of course, I'll supply my aviation experience to the committee. In terms of the rankings, and as I think I hopefully in the footnotes to my presentation, I set out the sources of those rankings, which are independent. In relation to the specific question that you asked, I am, and again, you must accept that I'm only in this role about three weeks. But as I understand it from my discussions with the IAA, every complaint that is received into the IAA is then assessed. And I believe, yes, I understand that there have been specific complaints from Ryanair and that they have been assessed. I don't have the detail of that at this stage, but it certainly would be critical in my mind as chair that all complaints that are received in relation to aviation safety would be properly assessed and discussed. So, as I say, I don't have the specific details of that, but I do know that that complaints have been received. But as I understand it, they've been dealt with.
Sorry, just on a point, Céidigh, that was precisely my point, that Ryanair pilots were very much aggrieved that their safety concerns that they had raised were not addressed. And in your opening statement, you said safety was a priority to you. So that's why I'm putting this to you. Will you look into those? Will you meet maybe perhaps with the Ryanair pilots to ensure that if safety is a priority and they are aggrieved at the serious issues that they had raised? I mean, that was the whole purpose of them trying to bring them forward to the Transport Committee, because they were getting nowhere with the IAA, or they felt they were getting nowhere. So I'm saying, if you're stating in your opening statement that safety is a priority for you and it ought to be, then perhaps what I'm asking you to do is, will you investigate and look into the complaints or the concerns raised by Ryanair pilots and maybe revert to us with a report on it? Sorry?
I don't know, could you be out of order like in asking Mr. McGrail are you in order to ask for that, like, you know?
Well, I'd imagine why would you not be allowed to ask for a report, an investigative report on safety issues raised by pilots? Why would you not be entitled?
Oh no, I'm not saying, but are you in order to ask for it through this committee, like, you know?
Well, I wouldn't be aware of anything that would block me from doing that. Are you aware of anything that would specifically block me from asking for that, Céidigh?
Well, I just thought about you might be preempting an issue, like, you know, through a new chairman designate, like, you know, and maybe Mr. McGrail knows more than I do, like, you know, but are you prepared to handle this question?
Can I come in here? I actually think this is an unfair question for you, Chair Designate, quite frankly. I'm over 25 years involved in the aviation industry. I must say, and I've dealt with a lot of government agents and departments, and there's hardly bar none who are at the professional level of the Irish Aviation Authority, and what I've seen in my experience. And I've been at the other end of the stick. And the Irish Aviation Authority have got a process through which they deal with all complaints from everybody, from any pilot or any process, and they go through that rigorously. Not only that, Deputy, but EASA, which is the European governing body for aviation, and they regulate the aviation authorities. They actually audit the Irish Aviation Authority on a regular basis, and if anybody has complaints in relation to safety of aviation, they go to the Aviation Authority. There's a process there that's internationally audited and checked out. And not only that, but it's done from the European Aviation Authority, EASA. So it is. And with respect, I don't think it for you, Chair Designate, to actually dwell into that area. I think the question should be put in writing directly to the Irish Aviation Authority and get a reply from there, and the Deputy would look to follow up with that then directly with the Aviation Authority. That's my view.
Mr. Councillor, here we are.
Just if I could come in there, thank the Senator for his contribution, but I think it's not for you to say either whether or not Mr McGrail should investigate or should be interested. I mean, he did say safety was a priority. I wouldn't be raising the issue with you, as I said, only that the Ryanair pilots feel aggrieved that their safety concerns. And if there's any sort of issue at all with safety, it should be thoroughly investigated. It should be looked into. There should be a report carried out, and not to do so would be a remiss.
Deputy, I appreciate that. My only response is that, as I understand it, every complaint, as I said, is investigated and reviewed and reported on within IAA.
Right. Well, perhaps we're going to have to look at maybe bringing, inviting IALPA and others back in again, maybe, because if there's not a willingness to, you know, to investigate the matter, then, you know, that raises even more concerns.
That's not true. There is an investigation of the matter, and Deputy, you're being very unreasonable and unfair. There is a process.
There is a process. On behalf of Ryanair pilots.
I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody.
So don't attempt
I am not
to
speaking
say that
on behalf of anybody. I'm speaking based on
when clearly they do. You don't represent them.
I don't. Absolutely, I don't.
You don't.
And neither do you.
They have serious concerns. Well, I'm actually interested in hearing their concerns because it's a public safety issue.
But
now,
there's a process for that.
If you're not interested, that's another story.
How dare you make assumptions about me like that?
You do not represent Ryanair.
I
never said I did.
They stood before this committee. They were blocked from raising their concerns. They're entitled to raise their concerns. It's a public safety issue, and we, as a transport committee, there's an onus on us to hear them. And that's precisely why I brought it up with Mr McGrail, because he says in black and white in his opening statement that safety is a priority. Now, my question was to
safety is a priority.
Yes, and that's why I asked was there any reports conducted? There doesn't seem to be any reports conducted, and I asked what steps were taken by the IAA to examine the
you must
serious
understand,
issues.
as the Chairman has told you, he's only in situ only less than a month.
Sorry, no, but
yes.
He's here to answer
He's
questions.
here to,
I'm sure he's quite happy.
going forward.
Yes.
Yeah. But I don't think today is the day to expect to have a case study, to yes or no on a case study. Like,
I'm quite happy for him to revert to me. I've said that.
Chair, can I remind you that the Irish Aviation Authority were in here a couple of months ago and they answered those questions fully.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I'll go back over the notes.
We have to move on. Deputy Munster, are you finished?
I'm finished now, Tommy Quick.
Senator Pádraig, Céidigh.
Thank you. Mr McGrail, you're very welcome, and it's not my normal style to jump in like that, quite frankly, but I felt quite concerned at some of the points that were raised and the position, our attempt to put you in a particular position, which in my view was unfair. I wish you well in your role as Chair. Wait till you leave, if you're leaving.
Yes, I am.
Good, okay. All right, I just don't want to be interrupted. Good. I wish you well in your new role. It's definitely a challenging role. The Irish Aviation Authority, as I've said in my experience, has been exemplary and is a standout Irish authority in worldwide aviation. I've said this publicly here before in the past. I've got a couple of questions. A point raised by Deputy Troy in relation to 5 out of 9 board members, I think that's a pretty serious issue. And I believe there's potentially, and I note in your CV background that this is an area of significant experience in, that could bring into question some corporate governance issues when you've got just barely over 50% of the members around the board. So I would urge, through maybe the committee and through yourself, that those positions be filled as soon as possible. I know one person on the board died suddenly in Cork a couple of months ago, and that's very unfortunate. Somebody made a huge contribution to Irish aviation. Jeffrey O'Byrne-White, who used to be CEO of Céidigh and so on. Great guy. Actually, just while I'm on that, I'd very much like to compliment. I'd actually like if the committee here would write a letter of congratulations to Eamon Brennan, the ex-Chief Executive Officer of the Irish Aviation Authority, had been so for probably about 15-16 years, who's now been appointed Director General of Eurocontrol, which is an incredibly significant and important role and position. And it just shows the quality and calibre of people in the Irish Aviation Authority and what they're doing on behalf of the country, that they're recognised worldwide. Eurocontrol is one of the main aviation structures worldwide. And I think it would be just fitting if we would do that as a committee, if that were okay, Chair, to propose that. Getting into a little bit some of the detail, Mr McGrail. Shanwick airspace, that was negotiated during the time of Eamon Brennan being CEO, and it's in the North Atlantic, and it covers 90% of transatlantic flights. That's really important for Ireland, and it's really important airspace for the Aviation Authority for a whole host of reasons. Can you provide us, maybe not now because I know you haven't got your feet under the table yet, but can you provide us with maybe some written feedback in relation to the status of that and potential issues that could happen in light of Brexit? Because I know this kind of came from British aerospace, British space, and it was effectively transferred into Irish space a number of years ago, and it's okay. Calling a spade, it's a reasonably significant income error for the Aviation Authority. And the Aviation Authority contribute almost 20 million by means of a dividend in 2017 to the Irish Exchequer. On Dublin Airport, there are a couple of things here. I really appreciate you making the point about supporting the North Runway in Dublin Airport. That's crucially important. And I would urge that all Teachtaí and Shanadurry in Leinster House would move forward with legislation as quickly as possible, because that's holding things up at the moment. And we should actually push for that and get it through as obviously debated, but rather not procrastinate on it. And that's one of the key issues that the DA have in moving on with their plans and in construction and getting tenders in and so on. Passenger numbers at Dublin Airport right now this year are expected to be 31.5 million. About 8 years ago, the passenger numbers in Dublin Airport were about 20 million. At the height of its, the Celtic Tiger, it was something between 24 and 25 million. So it's up 5 million. It's up about 20% on what it was at the peak. Now, there are those things actually start bringing safety issues into concern and how you deal with it. And I'm asking you, and maybe you may not be in a position to answer this now, but I think it's important maybe that we become aware of it sooner rather than later. Will Dublin Airport be required to be slot restricted, like you have in Heathrow and Gatwick and a number of other airports? And that's a big issue. The other thing is that EI and FR, Aer Lingus and Ryanair, account for approximately 80% of the passengers in and out of Dublin Airport. Obviously, they're part of EASA, which is the European regulatory structure at the moment. 20% would be outside of that. But you do have Etihad, you have other airlines who are flying in and out, and they are outside of the Brexit space. So, from my, I could be well be wrong here, but I don't think that it's going to be such a huge issue that flights will not stop between Ireland and in the UK. Having said that, I would appreciate if the Department of Transport could facilitate the public, but in particular the airlines and those involved in aviation, with their scenario planning for Brexit, because the airlines will have to make appropriate plans themselves, and when they don't know maybe where the department are at, it's kind of difficult to be clear in relation to plans. One last question in relation to that. Certainly value the Aviation Authority's view, and it may be outside your remit, on considering Baldonnel as a second airport for Dublin. Belfast have 2 airports, Glasgow have 2 airports, London has about 7 or 8 airports, but London is about 6 times the size of Dublin. Brussels have 2 airports. I think the debate needs to be started at least. Should Dublin have a second airport? The region of Dublin, in South Dublin, is just off the M50. There's a Lewis within, I think, about 5 minutes of Baldonnel. The state already owns Baldonnel. It was discussed back in the day when I did some research on it back in 1999 in relation to having a second airport for the Dublin area. And it could be a regional airport for primarily UK flights. It's usually kind of that type of an operation has been a second airport. The relationship between the Irish Aviation Authority and AAIU, Air Accident Investigation Unit, CAR, Commission for Aviation Regulation, and EASA, the European Aviation Safety Authority. It would be very helpful to clarify that from the committee's perspective, but also I think from the public's perspective. Where does the IA fit into the overall picture? I have more questions, but Pádraig, I've taken up too much time.
You have more questions?
No, well,
okay.
Comments, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Mr. Gray.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Yes, and I think as I mentioned to Deputy Troy, we would see it as being a positive thing that in fact, or I would see it as a positive thing that in fact there are 4 places available on the board, and I have been assured by the department that they will be filled. In terms of the Shanwick, yes, it is critically important. The position at the moment, as I think as I know that you will understand, is that under the 1996 agreement, the British Air Traffic Control look after the air traffic control in that space, and the IAA looks after communication. I think the issue is that the communication is based on, and again I'm getting into a technical area that I wouldn't be competent in, but our communication is based on high frequency systems which are now becoming replaced by other systems, and there is a need for IAA, exactly as you say, to ensure that we remain owning that communications aspect of Shanwick. Again, in the short period I'm there, I'm not. I haven't got any great detail on that, but I do know that the relationship between both the IAA and the equivalent in the UK is good, and I know that both IAA and indeed the department are anxious that we would try and ensure that if there has to be a new agreement, that agreement would solidify the current situation in terms of our role in Shanwick. You mentioned Dublin Airport and the North Runway. I think that was more a comment to the committee.
It was, yeah.
And yes, your point about Dublin Airport and how it grows, yes, and indeed more and more airlines are actually coming, obviously, into Dublin Airport outside of the traditional British, the BAs, etc., the Flybys, etc. And in terms of, I use the word scenario planning by the department in terms of Brexit, which was the term that they used to me. And we are collaborating with them. I suppose it's really up to the department, but I certainly will pass on your comment that it would be very useful for the department to share with the airlines how they might see Brexit actually emerging in terms of from the 29th of March onwards. In terms of Baldonnel, I don't really think that's probably something I can probably answer. Obviously, it would be a major policy decision and indeed investment decision, and I have no doubt the Department of Defence, I'm sure, would have a particular view on it as well. In terms of our relationship with the AAIU, and again, I'll have to apologise for only being in this role about 3 weeks. As I understand it, the EASA relationship is very good. Obviously, as you said, and indeed to the Deputy, there are regular, about twice a year, independent audits from EASA in terms of IAA, and obviously they're taken very seriously. I think as I understand it, they spend more than a few days within IAA in terms of assessing. In terms of the CAR, again, from my understanding, the relationship with them is good, and discussions have been ongoing in terms of the separation.
Yeah, sorry, there was some discussions there maybe about a year, 2 years ago, about the Commission for Aviation Regulation, which is CAR, becoming part of the IAA. I don't know where that's at now.
Well, as I understand it, in terms of the separation, what would actually happen is that the air traffic navigation aspects of the IAA would move to a NUCO,
Yeah.
and that the safety and regulation aspects of the IAA would remain, and that they would come underneath the CAR. That's as I understand it.
Okay.
You know, legally, in a process point of view,
Yeah.
there'll be a lot of issues in that. But I mean, that as I understand it, that's the proposal.
Okay.
In terms of the AAIU, again, they are obviously very much an independent body, and in particular in relation to R116, the IAA has cooperated with the AAIU in terms of that. To be frank, I don't have any further knowledge in terms of the relationship with them.
Okay, thank you.
So, just one or two comments and maybe one question. I suppose first of all, we must acknowledge, that given the role of the IAA and they're a very much profitable organisation, as you can see, they've turned out to be a bit of a cash cow for the Minister for Sport there lately when he sought to use your dividends to fund our hockey team, and that has to be welcome. But I suppose maybe it made him more aware that you do exist, seeing that he doesn't know how to appoint the board members. One question Michael, is the IAA separation, right? Okay. Obviously, you're losing the Aviation Regulatory Authority, right? Have we come to agreements about how that will be funded? Well, I know it's a bit early days for you, but
sure.
You must have some ideas. Like, yeah.
Well, again, within the 3 weeks, I'd have to say no. Yeah. But having said that, when one looks at the revenue, about 70% of the revenue comes from what we would call the air traffic management business, and then the balance comes from the other areas. So what we would feel is that what we would want, and I mentioned we would want to achieve a smooth separation. So we certainly would want the IAA NUCO to be well funded, but equally we would want to ensure that the safety and regulatory body that remains would also be well funded, and we would think we have the resources to do that.
Okay.
But again, that is complex, but we haven't gone into that in any great detail.
Very good. Listen, thank you very much for your time, and we wish you the best. And the meeting now stands adjourned until 1:30, 3rd of October next. Thank you all very much.